podcast. This is Professor Miller here today with one of our wonderful deans that we have here on campus, Dr. Melissa Wehler. Dr. Wehler, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It's incredible to be here. I'm so excited to talk about fashion, media, and culture with everybody today.
We certainly will talk about that in just one second, but we as the Media Club just want to preface, we're doing this just after our open house, and we wanted to say thank you very much for everything that you've done for us over the last year, because it was 1 year ago yesterday we released our first podcast, so it's amazing to see how far in just 1 year we've come with the support of people like you, so we really just want to say thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys, and I cannot express enough how very proud I am of this club, its students, its advisors. It's been an absolute pleasure of my career to help support you guys in this amazing endeavor that you guys have undertaken.
It's one step at a time, we keep saying, but fortunately we keep taking steps in the right direction, and we've got such a great vision. We announced that we're going to be procuring the materials to call the sports events. Hopefully we can get a little assistance from some technical people behind the scenes, because I'm a little afraid of that. But outside of that, I know it's going to be very successful. And you and certainly others, Dr. Scalfaro is one, Dr. Fadrizi Williams is one, that have been just huge supporters of what we do. And we certainly wouldn't be here without you guys. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, as Dr. Wehler alluded to, the reason that I brought her today to be in here today on our podcast is she is teaching currently a wonderful class called Fashion, Media, and Culture. And while anyone who knows me certainly knows that I'm not a fashion expert, nor do I claim to be, I still think that there are some really interesting topics here that, from my media background and from Dr. Wehler's knowledge about the subject, I really think that we can have an interesting conversation here about some of the things going on in the fashion industry at this time. I really would have loved to have somebody else in here with a little bit more insight on fashion, so I apologize to everybody if my fashion knowledge is not up to snuff, but give me a break because I'm at least trying. I wanted to just ask you, what was one of the things when you were first, before we get into some of the bigger questions, what was something out of the ordinary when you first came up with this class, when you were first developing this class? Tell me something that was a little bit kind of eye-opening or shocking to you that you found out that you were unaware of prior to taking over the class.
I think when I was first starting out with the class, I was really shocked about how much this is part of our media and part of the media coverage, and I kind of just gloss over it. Certainly the election season is not that far away from us, and the 2016 election season, we talked a lot about policies and we talked a lot about the issues, but we also talked a lot about the fashion, and I think that it's so part of our culture that we kind of just don't see it. So then when I started prepping for the class and really looking for things, I saw it everywhere and realized that I had been reading about fashion and fashion articles all the time. Everything from what Michelle Obama was wearing to the state dinners to would President Trump wear a coat to the inauguration, or would he be one of the presidents to be stand out and not wear a coat? So those kind of things matter, and people cover them, and it's very easy not to take fashion seriously and just say, well, that's just for people who care about it. But there's real consequences behind who gets covered and how it gets covered. Certainly for those of you who follow the Hillary Clinton campaign, Pantsuit Nation, right? It wasn't just about the fashion, what she was wearing, but what it symbolized.
What does it symbolize?
It's a great question. I think that if you ask sort of the person on the street, it's about power, right? And we have to understand that both of the candidates this year came really into fruition in the political spectrum in the 1980s when power dressing was real, right? And so that came with the slogan, you dress for the job you want. And we saw both candidates really try to implement that into their wardrobe choices. And so until the power suit came out for women were still wearing skirts and heels, which great, nothing wrong with that kind of dress. But it was this opportunity for women to sort of take on this idea that they could have pantsuits and they could dress comfortably and still retain that power of position through clothing.
From Hillary Clinton's perspective, how much time went into deciding what she wore at let's just take a debate, because that's probably when the most eyes are on her. How much time, not by her, obviously she had people behind the scenes doing it. How is there someone that's just in charge of dressing her for these type of events?
Yes, it is as much PR and marketing as it is anything else. And yes, she does have somebody who's looking at that. And what they were looking at was not only how she would look on camera, what colors were flattering. We remember when the first televised debates came out, and presidential campaigns, for the first time, we were seeing the candidates, what they look like under pressure. And it flipped the script for some of the candidates. The debates were make or break moments based on what they wore. If it wasn't flattering, if it made them look a little sickly, people start wondering, are they really healthy enough to take this job on?
You can look as far back as Kennedy and Nixon to understand
yes.
how important it is to the visuals of a debate. I mean, a lot of the people, just because Nixon was sweating underneath the lights, thought that, oh, what's wrong with Nixon? Is he sick? Why is he sweating like that? And so I can, now that you mention it, I can totally understand why having somebody dressing you and putting a lot of time into it could make a big difference, especially, and no disrespect to either of them, but they're both older.
Yes.
I mean, President Trump is the oldest president to ever be inaugurated into office.
Yes.
And Hillary is, what, I believe the same age or
Very
1 year
close.
apart. So,
Yes.
I mean, they were both getting up there, and so I guess that they had to go out and look strong. They had to go out and look virile, like, we're going to be able to make it through 4 or 8 years.
Yes, absolutely. And then the other piece with what she wore in particular, you'll see both candidates are always going to wear red, and blue, right? Very patriotic. They'll have the lapel pin, usually a little flag or something like that. But what she also did was she took on white as sort of the symbol of her campaign to symbolize the suffragette movement and to really just imply, without having to ever say it, look, this is historic. And I'm not just historic standing here, but I am also historic for all the women standing here behind me historically. So it was important on so many levels what she wore and why she wore it that way.
That's amazing insight into something that I honestly never really thought about.
I
Now,
know.
You understand that you're not naive enough to think that they're just pulling something out of the closet and
Right,
walking on
right.
stage. You know there's strategy behind it, but I guess I just never realized how much strategy was behind the way that they dressed. All right, well, let's get into some of the deeper topics that we have about this class. Obviously, in my life, I've done a lot of study and research about media effects. And one of the things that we always and constantly talk about is how advertising sets the, I don't want to say agenda because, kids don't think about it that way, but set the narrative for what is cool.
Yes.
I want to talk about a story that I will never forget as long as I live. And this will go all the way back to when I was in 5th grade, when I was 10 years old. So we're talking about 25 years ago. The best advice that my 5th grade teacher, now remember, we're going from elementary, 5th grade, to middle school, 6th grade. My teacher told me, and told the whole class, be careful when you go shopping for your shoes because people in middle school are shoe conscious. And that was the terminology that she used. And at the time, I was just sitting there thinking, who cares? They're just shoes. But I saw when you went what they were saying. Basically, we are to the point in our country, and maybe internationally, but certainly in the United States, that somebody can just look at you and what you are wearing and determine whether you are hip or cool or whatever, or on fleek or lit or whatever word you want to use. And that is troubling to me on so many levels. To know that you have to spend, and really all it is money. All it is money. So if you buy Nikes, you're saying, I spent at least $50-$60 on these shoes, as opposed to going and getting any other pair of shoes that are probably just as good, reasonable. I guess I just don't understand how we get to this point in our society where we are so judgmental about the way that people dress. Can you shed any insight onto that?
Yeah, I can. And, it's so interesting because it feels like such a new phenomenon, but it's not.
This was 25 years ago, and then it happened way before that.
Oh, and I'm talking centuries, though, Paul. So when we look in the class, we did a little bit of a whirlwind history of fashion. And we were looking really 18th, 19th century because, you could go back to the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians if you really wanted to. And some people were allowed to wear certain colors. Some people weren't. And, purple was reserved for royalty and people of the upper echelons of society, and other people wore other clothing, depending on how white your clothing was. It was also a marker of class, obviously, because you could keep it clean. If you're a laborer, you're not wearing white clothing. And that's where we get blue collar, white collar as well. So these things are sort of entrenched into our society. What's interesting about sneakers, and we do a whole week on sneaker culture in the class.
Really?
Yes. It's one of my it's one of my favorite topics when it comes to fashion because they're so utilitarian in their function. But what humans are infinitely able to do is take something so utilitarian in its function and make it, and sometimes totally impractical. You have the Nike shoes with the giant wing coming off of them, completely impractical. Why do we take something practical and make it impractical? Because it's a status symbol. And shoes have certainly become, really since the 1980s, a status symbol. And we see that in really interesting ways. So we talk about in the class, and sneakers are, again, a really great example of this. When we talk about in the class is the ways that sneaker culture is sort of driven by this elite culture, about the celebrity culture, and then we emulate that class, right? In the course, we talk about a theorist who was actually out of the 18th century, 19th century, and his name is Veblen, and he talks about the theory of the leisure class, and what he essentially says is that all of us, people who are workers in the working class, are trying to understand this leisure class, literally people who have nothing to do but be leisurely. And it's so...
What's that like?
I don't know. And it's so out of the realm of our understanding as people who are probably from the working class. We can't even imagine what it was like to not have employment, not to have to pay bills or worry about who's paying our bills, to live off of a generated income or an inherited income. It's right. So it's this piece of it. And in the class, I asked this very question of how do we still use the same paradigm of the leisure class to inform our decisions when it comes to consumption? And your favorite celebrity wearing a pair of shoes dictates what shoes you're probably going to buy, or what shoes are going to become trendy, what shoes are going to be more expensive. We are going to talk about a concept in the class during the shoe week is one to buy and one to store. So now the big trend in the shoe culture is you buy one pair of shoes to wear, and then you have another pair of shoes that never leave the box. They're called dead stock, right? And so that's a sort of luxury that seems very bizarre to people who are just looking at a shoe as very practical, right? Why would you ever just have a pair of shoes that you never wore out of the house, never took out of the box? But that is part of this desire to be known in the shoe culture and to have this status symbol that you can afford to buy shoes you don't even have to wear. So it's very interesting to me that, and the other piece about shoes, and I won't go on about sneakers, I promise. The other thing that's really interesting is not only are they very practical, and we've taken them and kind of made them impractical in some ways, but they are tied very much to feelings of nostalgia. So right now in shoe culture, some of the things that are coming back are things that haven't been popular since the 70s and 80s, because those people are now grown and have some extra income, and they can burn it on these shoes that they remember from their childhood. And a lot of the people you talk to in shoe culture are people who didn't have those shoes as kids and now are like, I'm going to, as an adult, get these shoes.
One of the things, one of my favorite shows is American Pickers, and I'm going to sort of relate to what you just said. And let's face it, 90% of the people that they visit on American Pickers are hoarders.
Yes.
And as Mike calls them, collectors. Almost every single one of them, that is their situation, especially a lot of the guys that collect toys.
Yes.
They collect toys because they didn't have the toys when they were kids, and now they're like obsessed with the toys now. That was an aside. I did want to follow up on that. So I'm guaranteeing in your sneaker week you at some point mentioned LeBron James and his contract with Nike.
Yes.
Before he was ever even picked in the draft and played 1 minute on the floor, he had a $100 million contract. And now, if I'm not mistaken, he's got a lifetime contract with Nike. But I don't even want to ask how that happened, because he was such a huge star as a high school guy.
Yes.
But how he has managed, and of course he's followed in Jordan's footsteps. Jordan was the original, now LeBron. I mean, how he has basically, I don't want to say saved Nike, but how he has made them into this global superpower just by being on a couple commercials and consulting on a couple of pairs of shoes. It just blows my mind. And I suppose it's anyone that's a basketball fan, at least if you don't like LeBron, you at least respect him. And of course, there's a lot of people who love him. And I just, people get so crazy. Like, how can they afford to spend $100 million on a guy that's never played a minute in the NBA? And they did take a gamble. LeBron could have not panned out.
Yep.
He could have just been another run-of-the-mill, he could have been an all-star. But, I mean, this guy's a generational talent, so they got lucky as far as that goes. What about the obscene numbers outside of LeBron James that some of these fringe basketball players, baseball players sign these contracts? How do they recoup the money? I guess I don't understand.
Well, for a fashion brand, any celebrity-based fashion brand is a huge gamble, especially if it's based on a specific person, and there's no brand really outside of that. Nike existed before Jordan, but really Jordan was the thing that popularized Nike in a lot of the markets where Nike is still very popular. LeBron is sort of the natural inheritor of that market. Now, with other celebrity brands, though, we see that not working out as well. A lot of hip-hop stars in the 90s and into the 00s had fashion brands that are not around today because they were not based on good basic concepts of fashion. They were based on this person still being popular for the rest of time, right? So you had things that have gone out of fashion. Some of the things that have gone out of fashion here, some of those celebrity brands, are still very popular in places like Japan, which has a burgeoning hip-hop market. You can still buy things like Rockaware over there, and they're still very popular, especially if you can get, antique, which is 20 years old. For some of us sitting here, it makes us feel very badly. But with the athletes, they can afford to spend it because that popularizes the brand. And it really rejuvenated Nike's market because Michael was sort of, for some of us, will be eternal, the eternal Space Jam Michael Jordan.
Did you know they're coming out with Space Jam 2?
I did not. Now I do. I'm so excited. With who?
Jordan.
Is it Jordan?
And I think LeBron's in it too.
Of course he is. But you do take a gamble, and you also have to marry yourself to that celebrity brand. So if LeBron James goes out and gets into some trouble, Nike's going to have to find a way to get out of that contract with them, because that is the danger of spokespeople. They can be just as helpful and harmful to a brand.
Interesting that you mentioned that, and I'm going to give an example. This is not in the fashion world, but I'm going to give an example of a situation where this came up. One of the things that I've been watching recently is the Ezra Edelman OJ Made in America documentary.
Yes.
And you want to talk about a company that nearly went out of business because their star was accused of murder and was hurt with OJ Simpson. I mean, they spent a good 15-20 minutes in that documentary talking about his relationship with Hertz, how it really, really helped the business. But as soon as this all happened, they had to shift every single part of their business model, their advertising structure. A lot of people ended up being let go. They had severe sales issues. So you're right. I mean, and not even just in fashion, but in any time you have spokespeople that are a part of your brand and they get themselves into some kind of trouble, that could spell serious harm for your business. Now, is Nike, unless it's LeBron, which he seems to have a pretty squeaky clean image, but would Nike be hurt if one of their number 50 on their list gets in trouble? I mean, are they going to go out of business? Probably not. No. But Under Armour, who is an up-and-comer, now they just, and I was actually listening yesterday to a podcast where they were talking about how signing Steph Curry was a huge deal for them because they signed him the year before he really broke out. And now he's their number one pitch man, I suppose you would say, because they don't have a whole lot of people that are supporting their brand because they're still relatively new. So that was very interesting. And hey, do you have any examples where a situation like that did happen?
Oh, yes. So some of you might be a little bit too old to remember this, but it's still very much part of the some of the issues that we face when we talk about the fashion industry. In the 90s, Kathie Lee Gifford, America's sweetheart, who was co-lining the Regis and Kathie Lee Hour, was huge in America. And so she got a product line named after her, Kathie Lee Gifford product line. It was about clothing, women's accessories. And it was sold at places like Walmart. And people found out through a little investigative digging that all of the clothing line was made in sweatshops. I
do remember hearing that, but the same thing is said about Nike.
Yes, so they're good. They're a really good test bubble to see what the differences were. Kathie Lee's brand identity was always this America's sweetheart person. And the fact that she, not her personally, but a company that she put her name on, was allowing these kind of sweatshop conditions to happen, she didn't recover from it. She's barely back on television in the last like 2 to 3 years with the Today Show. She's in the 4th hour, I think, still. Her image didn't recover from it, from this clothing line that had nothing to do with the thing that she was doing before the clothing line. And the clothing line collapsed, of course. This was at the same exact time Nike was facing the same scandal with using sweatshops overseas. Nike was able to persist because the people who had been attached to that brand loyal customer, they didn't really care how their materials were being made. So Nike was able to survive, not without dings, right? Their stock did take a hit. Some of the markets did collapse. But ultimately, their brand image and their brand identity was not based on this I love you persona and I want to be your best friend.
That is very insightful. Let me ask you, and if you don't know, we can move on to the next question. What did Nike do to respond to those? Did they change anything, or was it just business as usual?
Well, did they change anything, I think is a little bit trickier to kind of suss out. They did a lot more community relations, I would say. Good PR team, good marketing team. They said they would have more oversight in some countries. Whether they did or did not, remember, we're talking about corporate structures that are meant to protect the bottom line. So they can always blame a subcontractor, which is always what happens in those kind of situations. Somebody finds out that you're using a subcontractor. Probably 2 or 3 people on the hierarchy get fired for doing it. They replace them, business as usual. So, but Nike did go on a PR tour. They did promise to do better with the subcontractors they dealt with, but ultimately, did it change the process? Not really. Your Nike shoes are still made where your Nike shoes have always been made.
So we talked about adolescence and marketing and how that sort of sets the coolness agenda. But I guess we'll end on this final question. What role does fashion play in the self-identity of an individual? Mm-hmm. And maybe we can specifically talk about one specific group, and let's talk about the tween age group. What is that considered? 12 to 17, mm-hmm. 12 to 18.
Sure.
How does what you wear make or break your reputation in high school?
Sure. What I tell the class first week is always this: you can opt into fashion culture and you can pretend to opt out of it, but you're involved in it either way, right? So either you've given yourself over to fashion culture and you've said, I'm going to engage in this, or by opting out, you've become anti-fashion and are still as much a part of it because now you're trying to avoid certain things. So you have a fashion identity, whether you like it or not. In that age group, with when identity is so much in flux, right? You have so many other parts of it that you're trying to suss out. And you'll see, usually, children go through a whole variety of trends, is what we would call them, right? Phases, sometimes is what other people call them. And what you see there is they're literally trying on different identities. And they're doing that in a variety of ways. Mostly through clothes, maybe body modifications, dyeing your hair, putting on makeup, getting some piercings, maybe some tattoos. Hopefully not if you're under 17. But you see that process happening, and what clothing does, especially in those early years when you're developing as a person, you're developing, the values you'll have with you. You're developing yourself as an educated human being, as part of a society. What clothing helps you to do is to really understand and delve into each of those areas and test it out, as it were, and go out into culture and find out, well, this got me these kind of looks. I didn't like that, so I'm not going to do that again. This got me those kind of looks. I did like that. I'm going to do this again. So the larger society really plays a big role in norming those kind of attitudes. And I'll give you the example of swimwear, right? Swimwear is a hot topic where I know we're sitting here in the wintertime, but we're going to eventually have to all make these kind of decisions. And we have decided as a culture that even from the age of infant, well up into your 40s, 50s, et cetera, that women wear very skimpy swimsuits, that is considered culturally appropriate to do that. Men, usually, is the swim trunks, and that a Speedo, unlike our European counterparts, is not culturally appropriate. So we have set those bounds, and what you see younger people doing is trying to figure out where they live within the boundaries that society has created. When you hypersexualize things, when you give young girls very hypersexualized clothing, short shorts, short skirts, bikinis, things like that, you are setting them up for those kind of boundaries and those kind of parameters. On the flip side, for young men, if you give them sort of, the same run-of-the-mill T-shirts, et cetera, maybe they have some sayings on them that are a little bit risque, you're setting them up for a completely different cultural experience. And what you see happening there is, yes, the parents play a role in what they will and will not buy children. Children play a role in how they manufacture what they're given in terms of what will or will not be purchased. But still, society comes and you can only buy what is offered, right? Unless you're going to make your own clothes, which is a whole different conversation. That's the opt-out people, right? But if you're going to the store and you're relying on stores, then you're also relying on the decisions that somebody else made for the clothing that your children are going to wear.
But and I guess at what point does the media come in here? And this is sort of me trying to piece this puzzle together. The whole purpose to me of blaming maybe a harsh word, blaming the media for getting us into this whole fashion culture in the first place is marketing. I mean, you can go back and blame a lot of the problems in our country over the last 100 years on marketing. But at the end of the day, the biggest problem that I have with a lot of the marketing is that they are preying on individuals who are spending money that they shouldn't be spending on clothing that could better be spent elsewhere.
Sure.
And so at what point, and I guess to be in marketing, you can't really have a whole lot of a conscience, to be honest with you. I'm in marketing, and I do have a conscience, and that's probably why I'm a professor and not living in the marketing industry. But it is just mind-blowing when you see some of these commercials. It's almost like they're trying to sell you a specific self-identity, and they're doing a good job of it. But at the same time, do you really feel any different maybe if you're in a $1,000 dress or a $1,000 tuxedo, of course you're going to feel, a little bit better about yourself. But do clothes really make you feel better about yourself?
They can, sure. They can also make you feel really bad about yourself. I mean, that's kind of it's interesting the way that works. And what I tell students because we always get to this place of, ethical responsibility. Who ethically is responsible for some of the choices that we may or may not make? There's always the top-down people who marketing is pushing things on them that they may not want. And then there's the bottom-up people who say, no, it's my decision. I get to have those pieces. It's the fate versus free will sort of conversation. And here's the thing that drives everybody crazy is there's no good answer for this. Not one side is right and not one side is wrong. Marketing is producing goods that the culture has asked for. That's all they can do, right? That's your supply demand, right? Business 101. On the flip side of that, we're stuck in a cycle where we don't really have a say in what these things are doing. Now, if you want some hope, if we are to end this on a hopeful note, one thing that the media attention to fashion has been able to do is to bring to light some of these really dark episodes. Sweatshops was brought to light because of media attention. The conditions in the Bangladesh factory fire, those were brought to light because the media showed the light there and brought our attention to these places that are not in my backyard, right? So in some ways, the media is very much responsible, but I also think the media has to be and has to hold us accountable for these things as well.
The problem is with the media is all owned by major corporations and conglomerates, and these are also the individuals who are selling the clothing to us as well. So in their mind, it's going to be conflict of interest if they want to have any responsibility.
Yes.
So it seems to me like a never-ending cycle.
Yeah. Until it hurts their brand identity, they're very loath to make a change, right? Until people say, you made this decision and I will not buy this from you anymore, and push them to make better decisions. That's the power of the boycott. That's the power of the almighty consumer dollar. And so we're willing to put up with a lot as consumers. And someday maybe we won't be. I do have some faith in the fashion industry world as it is, because you are seeing more people starting small boutiques. Get ethically sourced clothing is a word we have now. 15 years, we didn't have that word. So there are places that people are able to chip through. The argument that sort of goes against what I'm saying, though, of course, is that those clothes are expensive.
Well, of course, and that's, I'm one of the biggest advocates of small business that you'll ever meet, and I was just saying yesterday, it's probably been 15 years since I've stepped foot in a Walmart, but you're going to pay more. But you know that money is staying in this area. It's not going overseas. It's not leaving this area. And the quality is going to be there. So to me, and hopefully to a lot of others, utilizing a small business to get clothes, to get food, to get anything, hopefully maybe that's the answer in some of the problems in the fashion world, is instead of paying $1,000 for a top name, go to your local stores, and you might have to pay the money, but at least you know that all that money is not being pumped back into marketing and other things. So, well, Dr. Wehler, I must say that this has been a wonderful time, and I've certainly become enlightened about the fashion industry. And if it were possible that I take your class, that would probably educate me a little bit more. But it sounds like this is a really awesome thing that you've done. You've developed this class, and I really hope that it runs again in the future. And hopefully some of the students out there listening would consider taking this class, because it sounds just absolutely fascinating.
I like to think so, and we will be running the class again. I've already had some people say, hey, I've talked to some people in your class. Can you run it again? We will absolutely be running it. It looks like fall. So stay tuned, everybody. And if anybody wants to come and sit in, it is 8:40 in the morning, but you're always welcome.
Well, again, Dr. Wehler, thank you so much for joining the Nightly News podcast today to talk about such an interesting topic. And I hope that we have you again on some other time. We can find another interesting topic to talk about.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, no problem. All right, for Dr. Melissa Wehler, Dean of Humanities and Sciences, this is Professor Paul Miller, and you've been listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
What's up? This is Dr. Linda Federizi-Williams, and you are listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Welcome to the Nightly News Podcast. We are on episode number 2. We're being joined today by Yuli Sadejo. Yuli, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
And we're also being joined by Career Services Director Steve Hassinger. Steve, how's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for inviting me.
Steve, February is a major month for you in Career Services. You've just got done with the Mock Networking Common Hour event, which we'll chat with you about here in just a minute. But you also have the largest job fair of the year, the CPEC Job Fair, coming up on February the 21st.
Correct.
So my first question is, let's just start at the beginning. Just last week, you had your first opportunity at doing a Common Hour. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you were approached about doing this Common Hour, or maybe what some of the ideas were when you were planning it?
Absolutely. Adrienne Thoman had approached us about doing the Common Hour because she thought it would be a good opportunity for us to work with students to help them learn effective networking skills. And we've done workshops like this before in Career Services. We did one in the fall term prior to our fall job and internship fair, and we had 12 students come out and participate in that, and they really enjoyed it, and they appreciated the opportunity to kind of practice their elevator speeches, practice networking before they actually had to go to an event and put it into place. So Adrienne thought it would be appropriate, and we agreed to do it during Common Hour when we had a captive audience, and obviously all students were invited to attend.
Captive audience, indeed. Now, when we're looking back, tell me a little bit more about how the event broke down, and if, let's just say, a student who really didn't quite know what they were getting themselves into walked in, maybe they were supposed to come for class. Can you give it a little bit of an idea about what the setup was like, and maybe what a student would have done at the mock networking event?
Absolutely. So many times when you go to a networking event, there's food and drink involved. And it can be a little bit difficult trying to figure out how is it that I start talking to someone when I've got a plate of food and a drink in my hand. Okay, so we had food and drink available, some light appetizers and some beverages, and we talked just a little bit about etiquette at a networking event. Obviously, you don't want to take a bite and then start talking to somebody with your mouth full. And students had an opportunity after we gave them instruction to get up, to grab some food, to grab some drink, and to start networking with one another as well as with faculty and staff who were present at the event. We also talk to them about preparing what's called your elevator speech. So if I just walk up to you as an employer that I'm meeting at an event and we've never met before, what do I say? How do I get started? It's intimidating knowing where to start. So we work with them on something called an elevator speech, which is a real brief introduction telling the employer who you are, why you're there, and what you have to offer to them, as well as what you're hoping maybe they can offer to you.
So you're saying it was a little bit of you're trying to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in the plans by having the food and drink there to help them understand how important the etiquette is, because in a lot of these mixers, even if you go to a job fair, even a lot of job fairs have food, have beverage, and I think that was an interesting element of this, that you put food out, and it's not just to come get food, it's to understand how important it is to, when you are in a setting like this, how to go about eating and drinking in a, if you even want to call it that, eating and drinking in a professional manner.
Absolutely. We actually have a student right now at this very moment that we're taping this podcast who is having lunch with her prospective internship site. They invited her, they did a phone interview, and they invited her to meet them for lunch today to talk about an internship with their company at Harsco Corporation. So it really does happen, and it's something that is good for everybody to know.
Well, and speaking from my own personal perspective, before I got into teaching, I worked in advertising, and honestly, almost every time I would go meet with a prospective client, we'd go out to lunch.
Right.
And you have no idea how challenging that is. A lot of times you're hungry. Many times we had to travel, and it might have been, if I'm used to eating 11:30, 12 o'clock, it might be 1 o'clock. I'm starving, but I also don't want to look like a carnivore trying to look for his next snack. And so it is a challenge to, even with what food you order, when you're in a professional setting like that. So I really did. That was something that I wanted to point out, how interesting I thought that, yes, there's food, but the food is there with a purpose.
Right.
So I thought that was very interesting. So I got to give you a lot of credit on doing this Common Hour event. I know that you have a larger audience than maybe you would in other places, and I think that this is just one more way, and I've said this a lot, this is just one more way that what you do in career services is really visible to our students, which is something that personally, in my experience at previous institutions, I did not get a lot of, and that's certainly one reason why I like to have you on in any way that I can and get the word out about what you do, because I just truly think it's so important for the students to get involved with. Let's move on to the CPEC Job Fair. CPEC Job Fair is going to be coming up on February the 21st at the Radisson. The first thing before we get into too much detail, I did want to point out that there is transportation.
Correct.
And to get that transportation, Steve, how would the student, if an interested student would want transportation, how would they go about doing that?
The student simply needs to register with us in Career Services and let us know that they need transportation, and obviously let us know when is a good time for them to go. The actual event is from 10 a.m. until 3 p.m., so they can come and go anytime during that time. So we will look at all the students who need transportation and find out what their schedules are and when they would like to go and return, and then we will be making round trips with the college van between 10 and 3 to provide that transportation for them.
And we're going to turn it over to Yuli now. Yuli's got a few questions from a student's perspective that I would really like to hear.
So the CPEC stands for Central Pennsylvania Employment Consortium, and it's founded in 1987, and we're in their 30th anniversary, and I think it consists of 19 colleges. Am I correct about that?
That's correct. It's employer partners and college partners. So there are about 25 of us who meet on a regular basis, typically 4 times a year, to plan this job fair together. The benefit of doing it with partners like this rather than just an individual school is you will have employers come to this event who might not travel to each individual school, but they'll come to this event because they know that they're recruiting from 19 different institutions.
And when does CPC join this program?
Central Penn joined the CPEC Consortium in 2003. So we've been part of the consortium for about 14 years.
Nice. Technically, how is the CPEC organization structure? And I know that you just talked about you met 4 times a year to discuss what it's going to look like.
Sure. Well, the benefit of getting together and meeting periodically like this with the employers and the other college members is that we can kind of pick each other's brains. And we're not only planning the job and internship fair, we are also getting updates from each of the institutions as well as the employers. So we find out what their hiring needs are when it comes to employers, what kind of internship opportunities might be available. Many times, schools that are part of the consortium will invite students and alumni from the other schools in the consortium to come to their events. So, for instance, last week, Kristen Fike, our internship coordinator, took some students to Penn State Harrisburg for a government job and internship fair that they were having. And it's a great way for us to learn from each other. At many of our meetings, we also do some type of professional development activity at the end of the meeting. So we get to learn from each other, and there's more power coming together as a group in a consortium than there is for any one of us individually.
That's a nice construction over there to be able to gather and meet with different schools to discuss what's going on and stuff like that. And going on to the next question, I'm a junior right now, and I'm looking for my internship opportunities and stuff like that. And I also look at the website, CPEC website, that I'm really surprising that they also have a resume. And talking about resume, can you tell us, to students, for me and the other students who is listening, about resume and other tips when we arrive at the job internship?
Absolutely. Well, first and most importantly, you want to bring resumes with you, okay? Number one, when you get there, you're going to come to a registration booth. And at the registration booth, somebody's going to check you in, and they're going to look at your resume and see if you're from one of the schools in the consortium. Okay? If you're not from one of the schools in the consortium, you're still welcome to attend the event, but we're going to charge you $10 because all the schools that are going together to do the work to plan the event is primarily for their students and their alumni. So other people are welcome, but we do charge them a $10 fee, which is still pretty nominal for the amount of employers that you're going to be able to see. The importance of having a resume with you is multifaceted. Number one, there are employers there who will take resumes. If they have opportunities that you're interested in, they'll take a resume right there at the job fair. Some employers will not necessarily take a hard copy of your resume. They're going to direct you to their website, okay? But it's still important to have a conversation with that employer, to talk to them about the opportunities that they have, to let them know a little bit about your background and your skills and your qualifications and why you think you would be a good candidate for that company to hire. And recruiters will tell me over and over, even though they meet hundreds of students at these job fairs, when they go the following week to their online system and they pull resumes off, if they see a resume from Yuli and they remember that they met her and she was really engaging and she really impressed me at the job fair, there's a lot greater likelihood that your resume is going to get pulled off of that website and that you're going to get called for an interview.
You know, Steve, one of the things that I wanted to talk about too is that the part-time job aspect. Obviously, most of these places are looking to hire for specific full-time positions in many cases. But a lot of the time, when I'm trying to talk to some of my freshman seminar students or even any first-year students, the big question is, I'm not ready to look for that career yet. Can you give us a little bit of ideas about what are some of the part-time job opportunities that exist at a job fair like CPEC?
Absolutely. Many of the companies that are coming to this do also have part-time opportunities. To give you an example, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts is going to be there. Obviously, they have tons of part-time opportunities. They just emailed me this morning and said we're really looking for some part-time lifeguards. So, might be a nice job for somebody while they're in school. But most of the companies that are involved will also have some part-time opportunities. And you're right, that's not the primary focus of the event. However, it is a great way to learn about those opportunities. I know we have some students right now who are working for Enterprise, and Enterprise will be at the fair. And they're working hours that, work for them around their schedule. So it's a great way to find out about internships, jobs, part-time or full-time.
I think a lot of times when we think about college jobs, we think retail, we think working at the mall or at a Target or, even at a restaurant of some kind. One of the things that I try to get across to my freshman seminar class, with your help, of course, because you definitely do a lot of assist me a lot with my freshman seminar class, is how important it might be for you to get a part-time job inside of a company that you want to work for or even may want to work for down the road. And I know it's difficult to say this. I know it's sometimes difficult to hear this, but honestly, everyone, if you are and have an opportunity to get involved inside, even on a part-time basis, one of the companies that you want to work for, that is going to look so wonderful on your resume, much more so than working in retail or restaurants. Certainly not talking down to those. I worked in restaurants all my life. I earned some valuable life lessons and made some wonderful connections. But I honestly think if I could have gotten involved in a more of a part-time role while I was in college, it may have advanced my career a little bit more quickly than it ended up doing.
Absolutely. And it is a great opportunity to not only earn some money while you're in college, but to start networking with those people who are in your field.
Well, and the thing is if you get involved with a company that you want to work for, even on a part-time basis, and you do a wonderful job, many of these companies hire from within, right? Can you comment on how that goes, whether most of these companies hire within or hire from the outside?
Well, what would you rather hire? Somebody that you don't know at all or a known commodity? I think a known commodity, right?
But of course, and that's why and one of the things I also talked about this week in my freshman seminar class, you joined me for a discussion about what career services does. One of the things I also talk about is the importance of career exploration. Do you think that going to this job fair is at least advantageous to students just to understand what types of jobs are out there? Because I think a lot of students, when you're in school, don't really quite understand what types of jobs they're even qualified for at an entry level or even a middle tier job.
Absolutely. And many times, let's say you're an information technology student. Well, so often I find they're looking for a company that has computer in their name. Okay. Well, everybody needs information technology people. So you go to this job fair, you might find out from Holy Spirit Health Systems, for instance, they have a lot of needs for IT people. Matter of fact, they have a major project where they're going to be hiring 200 people in the next couple of months.
Wow.
Because they're changing the system that they use internally. And they need people who don't even have to have strong IT backgrounds to just help with facilitating that transition. So it's a great way to find out about different companies that are out there, different opportunities. I know many times that when I talk to students, when they're in a job search, I'll say, what are some of the companies that interest you? And many times I found out that they don't really know who the major players are, who's going to hire somebody with their particular degree or their particular background. So you can find out about different companies, what are those companies all about, but you can also find out about different opportunities within those companies.
And I found that was interesting, Steve. Whenever I got to the point where I was done with school, one of my biggest problems is where do I go now? I had an internship, but I didn't know exactly what companies were even out there and what some of the jobs were for people. And again, I don't think that I did enough career exploration when I was in school. Another thing that we do in the freshman seminar class with the focus career assessment. Yuli, another question for Steve.
Well, do you know how many companies are in there that will come to the CPEC Job Fair and internship?
I do. As of this morning, which is February 3rd, there were 78 companies registered on the website. I'm sure that there are going to be additional companies, though, that are going to be added over the next several weeks. So I'm encouraging students who are interested in attending the event to continually check the website, which is cpec.info, and click on candidate information for the fair, because you can access a list of the companies that are registered. So in addition to the 78 that were on there today, I have a feeling we're going to add at least 15 to 20 more. So I'm estimating around 90 companies that will be represented.
Steve, do you mind just talking a little bit about what some of this, I mean, obviously you're talking about almost 100 companies, but can you just give a few of the major players that have been there every year, just so the students have an idea of who's going to be at the job fair?
Absolutely. I know Enterprise is a regular participant, and they have opportunities all over the place. And another thing that is a challenge sometimes for our students here in central Pennsylvania is they might not want to stay and work in central Pennsylvania. Maybe they're from Philadelphia, they're from Baltimore, or they want to go to Florida or whatever. So a lot of the companies that come to the CPEC Fair are large national or even international organizations that might have opportunities in other areas. Enterprise, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts I mentioned, Rite Aid Corporation is registered, Holy Spirit Health Systems, which is a huge health system now because they're owned by Hassinger Health Systems. So they've got opportunities all over the place. There are a lot of state agencies that will be represented as well, like Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, the Office of Comptroller Operations, who have hired a lot of our accounting students as interns and then kept them on afterward as permanent employees as well. So if you're looking for government opportunities, if you're looking for private companies, if you're looking for nonprofit opportunities, there are nonprofit organizations that are going to be represented there as well.
Just wanted to wrap a little bow on this. Yuli, you have any final thoughts for Steve?
I think that it'll be interesting since I will be attending to, and I'm looking forward to the job fair and what they offer, and I hope that so many students will be able to come and join and look for opportunities there.
Steve, first of all, I just want to say thank you so very much, not only for what you do, but for what everyone in your office does to support our students here at the school. Everything that you do, you've always been very kind with your time and helping us out with the Nightly News. In fact, I recall that you were on the very first podcast. So, Steve, not only were you on the very first podcast we ever did, you were also on one of the very first podcasts we did from our new studio. So you've had the opportunity to be along the whole time. So we really appreciate what you've done for us and your willingness to help not only the Nightly News, but the entire student body as a whole.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity because one of the biggest challenges we have is getting the word out to students about the events and the things that we're doing. So any opportunity that we have to do that, we're glad to be part of.
And we're going to do anything we can to make sure that any time that you have something big coming up, we have you on the podcast. Before we sign off today, there is one thing that I wanted to talk about and I wanted to share with Steve. Steve, Yuli has just been voted vice president of the Nightly News Media Club, and I just wanted to take this time to tell Yuli how much we sincerely appreciate all of her hard work and really look forward to having her on as vice president for the next year and hope to see that the future growth is as big as it was in her first year as secretary. She's now moved up to vice president. So I wanted to extend a congratulations to Yuli on a wonderful job well done, and I think this is going to go a very long way to helping her resume someday.
Absolutely. On behalf of Career Services, congratulations, Julie. Employers love to see people who are involved in clubs and organizations, and particularly when people take a leadership role. So Professor Miller's right. That is going to go a long way in helping your resume stand out amongst others.
So we're going to finish up here. Just don't forget that the CPEC Job Fair is coming up on February the 21st. It's going to be over at the Radisson. For more information, you can stop into Career Services offices, email them. They've got a tab in Blackboard with all of their contact information. So just send them an email. Let them know that you want to go to CPEC, the CPEC Job Fair, and if you need transportation, they have that for you as well. And as always, keep an eye out for other events Career Services is doing. So, Steve, thank you Steve and Yuli both, thank you so very much for taking time out of your day to be here with the Nightly News Podcast.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right. So, for Steve Hassinger, Career Service Director, and the new Vice President of the Nightly News Media Club, Yuli, this is Professor Paul Miller, and this is the Nightly News Podcast. Signing off. We'll see you next time.